Last week, I chronicled my introduction to the world of video games, and it all started with this very device here, and this game, Sonic the Hedgehog 3. Of course, technology's come a long way in the last few years, and CRT screens, well, there's some people who absolutely adore them because they do give a very sharp image for what they're designed for, but we're no longer with that. So, I've got a copy of all of the old Sega Mega Drive and original PC and Sega Dreamcast games, all there on the shelf. But the challenge to unpack my video gaming legacy and history had to go further than that. Once Sega had bowed out of the hardware business, I had a choice between Sony, Nintendo and Microsoft. And because I had family members who led towards Sony's console, I ended up going in the opposite direction. Here is the video of me unpacking my retro video games collection and the filling of these shelves. As Sega departed the hardware console business, I started looking around for somewhere else to house my video game collection. Now, at this point in time, my brother had already purchased a PlayStation 2, so I was well stated for access to Sony content. And with the rise of the next generation of gaming with the death of the Dreamcast, I had a simple choice: plump towards Microsoft or towards Nintendo. Now, it wasn't as if Sega, who were still publishing games, was any assistance at this point. They split their content across all three consoles, incredibly annoyingly, not publishing every game on every console. They seemed to decide on one franchise or another arbitrarily. This is a Microsoft-style game, this is a Nintendo-style game. But ultimately, Sonic seemed more geared towards Nintendo. He did eventually arrive on the other consoles, but at first, it was a natural fit for him to side by Mario. And I was familiar with some of Nintendo's offerings. I had never really played a Super Nintendo Entertainment System at the time, but I had a friend with a Nintendo 64, and I'd heard of The Legend of Zelda. I'd particularly heard of The Legend of Zelda because the one Nintendo thing that everybody knew about was the legendary Game Boy franchise. Now, I ended up buying quite a few of these games. The only actual honest-to-goodness Game Boy game I have would be these ones here: Super Mario Land 2, and then 2 of the Tomb Raider games released for that console. But I did eventually plump for a Game Boy Advance, and I built up quite a small collection for that system. So in no not chronological but alphabetical order, we have the following to turn to. First of all, there's Croc 2. Now, I love the original Croc. I had it on, played it on both PlayStation and PC. It's a really fun and unappreciated game. It's got a lot of good things going for it if you get your head around the control scheme. The Game Boy Color sequel doesn't quite live up to those heights. It's an isometric platformer. It's fun to mess around with, but I never really gave it the time it deserved to properly understand. Next up, we have Square's entry. So the big discovery on the PlayStation 2 for me was the discovery of role-playing games, particularly the Final Fantasy franchise. And once I'd been back and discovered Final Fantasy 7 and 8 on the PlayStation 1, I then had to turn to the Game Boy Advance for access to the further retro titles. Final Fantasy 1 and 2 Dawn of Souls is a fantastic compilation of these two games. They're upgraded, they've got extra content, they're brilliant to play through with all sorts of quality of life changes. This really, still today, even in 2021, with the Pixel remasters, which look like they've got some good things, but they're also lacking a lot of other things. This possibly is still the definitive version for me. Square did quite a lot of few things on the Game Boy Advance. Then once they released the first two, they then turned to Final Fantasy IV, and we have this title, Final Fantasy IV Advance. Again, a lot of really good stuff going on here, quality of life changes, play through this game to completion. And I believe there was one other Final Fantasy title, there we go, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. Now, I'd missed out on the original Final Fantasy Tactics on the PlayStation 1, but I was aware that it had a pretty stellar reputation. This game didn't draw me in at first, but years later I came back and discovered it. And yeah, it's got a lot of depth and a lot of really fun elements there for a tactical RPG. I think my big problem with these Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Color titles is they do tend to plump for these isometric gameplay. They can't do full 3D, but they were clearly trying to imitate what the consoles were doing. And Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Rings is another game that sort of falls by the wayside because of this problem. I remember messing around with it, but again, there was just too many small things that sort of stopped me really being drawn in by the ambience. This drive towards isometric. I much prefer, if a game's going to do a 3D map, that they adopt the Pokemon style. Just accept it's in a grid, up, down, left and right, 8-dimensional movement if you need it, but there's so much good stuff in that simple map view of the original Pokemon games. And yeah, this is the one Game Boy title that I purchased for that to play on the Game Boy Advance, because I had to. This was the franchise that everybody knew about. It transcended gaming. It transcended video game with the card games, which were everywhere, and it also entered the television in your home with the anime. And so we had the original one for the Game Boy, and we had I got the golden sequel for the Game Boy Color. Both of them played to death in the back of the car whilst being driven around on various family holidays. Then we have Sega. As we entered the Game Boy Advance, we had their revisiting of the two-dimensional side of the franchise with Sonic Advance. That I had a lot of time for. It's quite an interesting game. It's a bit slower than the classics from memory, but it has some good stuff. They then overcourse corrected with the sequel, Sonic Advance 2. If the first one could be accused of being just a little bit slow, this one was too fast, too far in the opposite direction. And this is the birth of the boost gameplay formula that has really blighted Sonic over the last few years. I say blighted. It's not that there's anything inherently wrong with boosting in Sonic games, but you really need the gameplay design to be intelligently designed around it, and I just feel they fall upon it as a crutch. But we'll come back to that, I'm sure, in future videos. Then, finishing off the trilogy with Sonic Advance 3. This one, again, I think this one solved the level design problem. It was a really good mixture between the faster and slow elements of the previous two games, but they blighted it by making this co-op function absolutely mandatory. It's a really nice idea, but when there's no option to escape it or turn it off, it makes the game quite divisive. I'm not averse to game-changing styles, however. I really liked Sonic Battle. This is a really fun isometric. Again, I've just criticised games for being isometric, but this one does it right. It takes very small, focused fighting arena fields and have you play as one Sonic character battling against another. I mainly remember it for the story mode, which was incredibly long and complex for this type of fighting game. But there's a lot of complexity here, and I'd love to see this remastered and brought back to a more modern audience. And then one more Game Boy game. As I said, I had the Tomb Raider games of the Game Boy. I picked them up a few years later, to be honest. I never played them contemporary. The one game I did play at the time contemporarily is Tomb Raider The Prophecy. Again, an isometric style game. It does a fairly good job of trying to capture what the original core design Eidos games were doing, but there's a few glaring issues here. So that's my Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance collection. I then moved on to the Nintendo DS. I've unfortunately lost the boxes for these. It's a bit of a shame. I'm sure they'll turn up somewhere. The only box I actually definitively have been able to find is this. My first ever gaming eBay purchase. I really wanted to play Phantom Hourglass for the Nintendo DS. I had a Nintendo DS and I didn't want to pay full price, and I'd seen people selling it on eBay. And I purchased it, and only after I'd plugged it in, played half the first level and then had the game crash on me, did I discover that this is the North American version of the game. Buying from eBay, I'd accidentally crossed over to different gaming regions and found it was unplayable. I was devastated and put off eBay for quite a long time. Okay, I'm breaking the order of all things here and actually filming something afterwards because I thought these boxes were lost. But with a last minute discovery and some new filming, I've actually found everything that needs to go on this shelf. So, in order for the Nintendo DS, on the PAL European box art, we have Chrono Trigger. This is regarded as one of the strongest RPGs ever made. So many creators went into this when it originally came out on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, and I didn't get to experience it until this DS re-release, and I was really thankful that I got the chance to go back and relive this classic. But the Nintendo DS really was a role-playing games console for me, because next up I had Final Fantasy III. Unlike the Game Boy Advance remakes of Final Fantasy 1, 2 and 4, this was a full-on 3D reimagining of the original game. It was structured pretty much exactly the same, but it used what were, for the Nintendo DS, fairly advanced polygonal three-dimensional character models, which now, with the advent of hindsight, was an awful thing to do. This actually is, one would say, the Pixel remaster appears like it really is the preferred way to play this game. Then we have Final Fantasy XII Revenant Wings, a true sequel to the PS2 original game. It's a little bit different, a little bit divisive. It does some very weird things, but I had a lot of fun with this title. Then, one more Final Fantasy game. I did not care much, as I think I've said, for the co-op Gamecube original of Crystal Chronicles, but I did very, very much like this spin-off, plot-driven, single-player adventure spin-off on the Nintendo DS. I think there was a lot of good stuff in the world of Crystal Chronicles, and I would have been happy to see more games in this style sort of follow that sequel. And then, to conclude our RPG alike, we have one of the most unique entries in the Kingdom Hearts franchise. There is something very unique about 358 over 2 days. Not just the title, which is absurd as hell, although it does kind of indicate to you what's exactly going on. This game is about the drudgery of having a job. Wake up, work, relax, sleep. Wake up, work, relax, sleep. It's that repetitive cycle. The movies and the plot are available on the remastered collections of Kingdom Hearts that are available, but I honestly think if you're not actually experiencing the drudgery of this game, you're missing out a lot of what it has to offer. The individual missions are usually fairly short. It's designed to be picked up and played in short bursts, which is well designed for a handheld. And I really wish that they'd managed to find the time, the budget and the money to actually remaster it properly. Then we have Metroid Prime Hunters. It was an ambitious idea to bring the full Metroid Prime formula to the Nintendo DS. They did a fairly good job. There's some big flaws to this game, but the concept, the underlying idea behind it, it was okay. It was fairly strong. Then, having skipped a generation of Pokemon, I picked up the third generation after the fact. Before that, I actually played Platinum. This was my return to the Pokemon franchise, and I really adored it. I saw how little... This was the point where I probably realised just how little the Pokemon games had evolved. All these years later, that's still a continuing theme, yet this one I had a lot of fun with. Then we move on to the Sonic games. Sonic Rush. After the... I really enjoyed the Game Boy Advance Sonic games. The Sonic Advance was quite interesting. The Sonic Rush games were altogether different. They brought an energy, they brought a vibe. I really, really liked Sonic Rush, but I did not like it as much as I liked its sequel. I think the general consensus of the gaming community is that Sonic Rush Adventure is a poor sequel to Sonic Rush. No, for me, this is perfect. This was exactly what I wanted to see in a sequel, and it brought everything to the table. And then we have the DS version of Sonic Colors. Now, one thing I will say definitively, the ultimate version of Sonic Colors that is now available for the PlayStation 4 is not definitive, it is not ultimate, it is not content complete. It misses out a lot of the stuff that was in the Nintendo DS version of this game, which is really a shame because I loved a lot of the stuff in the Nintendo DS version of this game. So, yeah, that's a shame. It carries on the Sonic Rush formula. There's one more RPG, Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood. Again, a very divisive game, taking the Sonic the Hedgehog character and putting in a role-playing game. But it did some interesting things. It unfortunately had the misfortune to end on a cliffhanger that has never been resolved and probably now never will be. Still, BioWare did a decent job with this, and I wish Nintendo and them had sort of held their nerve. The music in it is truly awful, though, which is always a bad point for the Sega franchise. Then we have two Zelda games, Phantom Hourglass and... the people selling this game put the sticker over the title, and I am embarrassing myself by struggling to remember it. It's the train one. The train one. I actually prefer it to Phantom Hourglass. I really like this. The train Zelda game. Oh god, I'm embarrassing myself now. They're okay games. definitely I can see why they're a little bit divisive in the Zelda community. And then my final alphabetical Nintendo DS game was Worms Open Warfare 2. I've said before, consoles don't ever really feel complete unless they have a Worms game. So, it's a relatively small Nintendo DS collection, but I had a lot of fun with it. It's mainly either role-playing games or Sonic. Yeah, funny that. I had to make a choice for the home console. I had to decide whether to go for Xbox or to the Gamecube. And in the end, it wasn't really a choice, it just happened. We started buying games for the Gamecube because that's where Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 Battle were remade. Yes, I had them for the Dreamcast, but I wanted to be able to play them on my current console, and I was able to get them fairly cheaply. But in alphabetical order, we start with Sean Connery's last performance as James Bond. A game remaking and rechronicling From Russia with Love. I've really not put that much time into this game. I bought it after the Wii had come out, so I really one day plan to go back and discover it. But what I did play, I really enjoyed. It's there in the backlog for me to discover properly. I am lucky enough to be a proud owner of the Game Boy player, which means all of these games aforementioned, I can play them on the big screen without the need for emulation. Of course, any other games I don't own, yeah, that's the only alternative. But here we go. The Game Boy player for the Nintendo GameCube, one of the most exciting things at the time. It was always disappointed me that they never released an equivalent device to let you stream your DS or 3DS games onto the big screen. I get the idea of handhelds, I get the idea of being able to take it portably, but the thing the Switch solved, which every Nintendo handheld console since the Game Boy Advance had failed at, is I then want to be able to cast it and show it on the big screen to relax and just immerse myself in the game. Then, alphabetically, the next game, and this was one of my favourites back in the day, Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance. This is a spin-off of the traditional RPG franchise. It's more of a Diablo-style clone. It's a hack and slash. Choose one of 3 main characters to fight your way through hordes of demons in dungeons in a fairly aggressive overworld. It's really good co-op multiplayer, and I think it's been re-released in the modern age if anyone wants to check it out. From the original game, if the remaster's any good, I'd give it a vote of confidence. Then we have Michel Ancel's sequel, or not sequel, to Rayman 2, Beyond Good and Evil. I've already waxed lyrical of how much I adored Rayman 2 as one of the best conversions from a 2D to a 3D platformer. And this game director, having done that masterpiece, then went and did something entirely different. I do think it's held back by the limitations of the console and the area in which it released, but there's so much to love here. It's no one, if the marketing had just said this is a Legend of the Zelda inspired adventure, I think there would have been a lot more applause for it, because this took what 3D Zelda games were doing and puts a political and adventure spin on it that I just adore. Again, that was a really solid title that deserved to do better. Sonic Team have always been their best when they've been allowed to mix up styles. And so after doing Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2, when they moved on to the GameCube, they wanted to make a title that was worthy of that console. It's bizarre, it's a little bit weird, but Billy Hatcher was what they came up with, and I really got into the game, but the later stages are incredibly difficult. It's got a control scheme that you really have to master, so you can't put the game and then come back to it months later. If you really get stuck and leave it, come back, you've probably got to start from the beginning, because if you lose those fidelity of the controls, the late stages are almost impossible. Then we have one of the biggest disappointments on the console for me. Now, that's not to say there are worse games. There are many worse games than this, but I absolutely adored The Legacy of Kain Soul Reaver on the Dreamcast. I absolutely adored Soul Reaver 2 on the PlayStation 2. So when I played Blood Omen 2, the sequel to the original Legacy of Kain franchise, it kind of soured me on everything that they were doing. Kain, who'd been such an enigmatic villain in the Soul Reaver games, was reduced to this, and it just wasn't engaging and kind of put me off the character, which probably led to my kind of disengagement with the PlayStation 2 sequel to this, Defiance, which was unfortunately the last Legacy of Kain game. Some franchises are just brought low by the weirdest decisions. A game I didn't play until after the Wii had come out, but I am so glad I picked up when it was still available, was Eternal Darkness. Sci-fi horror, psychological horror, Eldritch, Cthulhu. There's so much good stuff in there, a kind of adventure through the different dark aspects of history, told through a haunted house tale. There's been a lot of interest in this title in Halloween this year in 2021, I noticed, and yeah, I understand why. I can understand why so many people remember this fondly. I wish I'd played it when it was contemporary. The game I did play when it was contemporary, my discovery of the Fire Emblem franchise. Path of Radiance, until very recently, has been my favourite Fire Emblem game for a very long time. It really, just the transition from 2D to 3D, it's a theme I keep coming back to, but they made some very intelligent choices in drawing these characters out and making it fun to explore this world. I never actually got the sequel on the Wii, and I don't know why, because I adored this first game so much. I've already mentioned that I bought the Crystal Chronicles one of the spin-offs for the DS, but the original Crystal Chronicles, I never really got behind that much. The enforced multiplayer aspect, again, I've mentioned this with Sonic Advance 3, forcing multiplayer on a game which it's kind of an intrusive aspect on, if the game can be quite controversial, and this for me on Crystal Chronicles, yeah, I was able to play it multiplayer. My brother had a Game Boy as well, but we didn't find it fun to set the controllers up and do so. Next we have my second James Bond title. This one I did buy when it was contemporary, EA's Nightfire, a fully fledged James Bond adventure made for console. It was marketed at the time as bringing back the style and the ethos of the GoldenEye games. And I got that, it was really fun to play. Then we get on to some of the Nintendo big hitters. My next game is Mario Kart Double Dash, and this actually came with the console. I purchased a Gamecube from the Mario Kart Double Dash Limited Edition pack. You'd think that would mean Mario Kart is one of the most important games on the Gamecube? Well, not quite. I definitely spent a lot of time with it, and it was the definitive party game on the Gamecube for me, having never owned any of the Mario Party franchise. But I didn't buy this for the Double Dash aspect. I purchased it because it came with the console. It had this special, not to be sold separately, Legend. It's not even listed on the back. Let's have a look inside. The very special Legend of Zelda Collector's Edition Gamecube disc. This is where I discovered. Now, I was already aware of Ocarina of Time. I knew about it in Majora's Mask and had played at a friend's house those games. But this is where I got to really discover those games and play through Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask from start to finish and just discover what I'd been missing out on. Really fantastic games. And this next one is a really fantastic game as well. I'd put Metroid Prime, it's in my top 20 games of all time. It's actually probably in my top 10 games of all time. The spirit of adventure of Super Metroid, which again, at this point in time I'd never played, but I now retrospectively know this is a perfect translation of that experience. It's a first-person shooter, but it's also an adventure game, and it merges the two genres perfectly. Really loved that game. And its sequel was somehow even better, whilst being just not quite as original or definitive. There's a lot to love and echo as it ramps up the difficulty, but if I just want to boot up a Metroid game and play it for a bit, I'll probably plump for Prime over this. But no, they are the two brilliant aspects of the franchise. Then we have Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. I bought this because I wanted a fighting game for parties. I needed a game that we could just have multiple people beat each other up with, and with Street Fighter and Tekken and all those franchises being what the average non-gaming gamer would want to see for a party game. First-person shooters were still a bit controversial at the time. This was before Call of Duty and Battlefield really took off, so the average non-gamer, if they saw a console and said, "Can I play?" Yeah, actually, they'd probably prefer Mario Kart. But following that, they'd say, "Okay, we've got a fighting game." And so I needed one in the franchise. I've got no personal love for Mortal Kombat, save for I had a lot of other friends who played a lot of it. A game I picked A game I picked up because of its reputation rather than because I particularly wanted to play it was Peter Jackson's King Kong. Yeah, it's a very good retelling of the movie, but as I don't have many fond memories of the movie, it's a game I need to come back to. I don't remember much about it. I do remember, however, the game that Michel Ancel didn't make, which is Rayman 3. This was not the sequel to Rayman 2 I'd wanted or expected, but it brings a lot of new and original things to the table in its own right, which are worthy additions to the franchise, but I'm not completely surprised we never got a 3D Rayman sequel to this. It just didn't have the spark that the previous game had that made it feel like it deserved one. Of course, I had to purchase Resident Evil 2 for myself. This was my first Resident Evil game. I'd seen a friend playing it on the Sony PlayStation. I'd actually held the controller for myself a bit, but I spent the majority of the time actually just sitting on the side of the bed, biting my fingernails in tension as they worked their way through the police station. But once it came out of the Gamecube, I knew I needed to explore and understand that for myself. Next up alphabetically, I have, and I told you he was coming, Sonic the Hedgehog Mega Collection. Almost all of the original 16-bit games reproduced and re-released on the Gamecube. I probably put nearly as much time into those remakes, ports and remasters as I did playing the original on the Mega Drive. I put almost as much time into the Sonic Gems collection. Here, I finally got to play Sonic CD. I've mentioned in other videos, not in the collection video last time, my inability to discover Sonic CD on the PC. When I started playing Tomb Raider 2 on the PC, that was an exciting moment, but the game I really wanted to play was Sonic CD, and it was just almost impossible to hunt down a Windows copy of that disc. I eventually got hold of Rayman 2 on the PC, which I no longer have the disc for. I do have it on the Dreamcast. But it was Sonic CD that made me want to start playing PC games, and the fact that I can now play Sonic CD on the Gamecube was just a dream come true. Then we have some more remasters and ports and re-release. Sonic Adventure DX. Now the original was a really good game. The DX Director's Cut, it introduces some problems. It's not the graphical changes I object to. There's a few more bugs, a few more things that just make it feel a bit more sloppy than it was originally. But it's fairly solid for the time. I have no, however, such controversies about Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. That was almost a launch game for the Nintendo GameCube, one of the best-selling games of the console, and this really was the last moment Sonic was undeniably in his prime. Because unfortunately, I have less positive things to say about the sequel. I mean, it sold well, Sonic games tend to, but there are just a few too many gimmicks forced into Sonic Heroes that don't make it a fun experience to play. And even more gimmicks forced upon the player. I don't hate Shadow the Hedgehog. I had a lot of fun with the game, but I can see why it had a controversial reception. It's not a broken mess, and the worst was yet to come for the Hedgehog. There was a pretty good spin-off game for the series, Sonic Riders. Again, this is one of those games that if you learn and master the controls, there's a lot of enjoyment to be had. Getting the hang of how these skateboards are powered and can be flown and ridden. Yeah, you can pull up a lot of really insane tricks if you learn the level designs. It's a really well-designed title, but it's hard, almost impossible to pick up and play. There's no really good tutorial, it doesn't explain itself well. You've really got to put effort in to master that one, and it's kind of the way the franchise was going. It requires you to put effort in to enjoy it, and that's a game design philosophy a lot of people have a problem with. Soul Calibur 2, I did actually have another fighting game for the franchise, and this one was really good because you could play as Link in it. It's kind of less... Mortal Kombat, I'd say, was a little bit more mainstream accepted than Soul Calibur because it's a bit more simple to control. Again, second-hand Star Wars game. I remember picking up the Clone Wars, trying it out, and then kind of putting it down and walking away. I'm probably going to have to go back and try that out again. It's kind of followed in the footsteps of Demolitions as being a slightly unfortunate title. I picked up Rogue Leader several years later, fairly cheap, and I can understand why it got the appraise it did when it launched. This was a launch title for the GameCube, quite an exciting game, and I'm glad I managed to pick it up cheap while it was still available to do so. The other launch game for the title, and one that I did pick up pretty quickly after buying the GameCube, is Smash Bros. Melee. One of the most impressive fighting games of all time, and actually the first game of the GameCube I played, because before I bought a GameCube, I played a copy at a friend's house. I mentioned before my issues of the enforced multiplayer of Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. The other game that does that, although a bit less obtrusively, is Legend of Zelda 4 Swords Adventures. I have played it both single player and as a 2-player co-op. It's fun, but it's lacking the charm and polish that you kind of expect from these types of Legend of Zelda games. There are a few more Legend of Zelda games for the console, however, and the next one is definitely not lacking in the charm or polish. This would be The Legend of Zelda for the Wind Waker, and I was able to pick this up second hand in a collector's edition sleeve with a gold casing. That was a really, really special find when I was able to find that second hand and add it to the collection. And it just justified for me, after playing Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask on the Mario Kart bundled in title, that this was a really special franchise. And I was even more excited when the sequel to that, Twilight Princess, was announced and came out a few years later in the heydays of the console. My favourite games are yet to come, however. Probably the GameCube game I put the most time into was Time Splitters 2, because I played that in my own house. I played that with my brother. I played it at my friend's house on their PlayStation 2, both just when it was the two of us, and when we had groups of up to 8 people playing on 2 PlayStation 2s plugged together in giant LAN parties. This was one of the most important multiplayer games of the generation for me, and I can see why it was overtaken with the online connectivity of Halo just a few years later. And there was almost as much love for its sequel, Time Splitters Future Perfect, the third one in the trilogy. 2 absolutely brilliant games that I would love to see remastered for the modern age. Then 2 more games to go on the GameCube. We have Tomb Raider Legend. After the disaster that was Angel of Darkness, Lara Croft had a bit of a break, and when she was eventually brought back by Crystal Dynamics, there's a lot of good stuff to say about Legend. I have some issues with the game, but overall it's a very positive experience. And then I have to close up with one more launch game and one more classic that the GameCube collection would not be complete without. It's Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 4. Sorry, Pro Skater 3 was a launch game. Pro Skater 4 was a sequel that did, as far as I was concerned, it did everything right. So that's it. That's the GameCube collection. It's a fairly substantial number of games, and we've got more to go.